Anime, final product of counterculture commercialism before reaching redefinition of intelligent design. Summary: the strange presentation of wide-eyed caricatures of youthful appearing depictions on screen that are fully crafted and designed to give the appearance of an art form, but regardless of the accents of presentation, the depiction can be anatomically be discerned and forensically searched for its utensil and intent. Before reaching transferring of criteria of intelligent design to redefinition, and the singularity precipitated by CERN in Switzerland in connection to the development of the Internet of Things and the Metaverse, World Wide Web originated at CERN, which is our current Tower of Babel model, which is being integrated into everything on the face of the planet by continuous spraying of engineered nanoparticulates and integrated into the foods, including gene-altering technology. The nexus point of plateau of illusion of not being able to tell real from artificial, and life from synthetic recreation. Continue article after aforementioned information sources and references down below. Search engineered nanomaterials in food and gene editors on ncbi.gov or PubMed. Importance of health hazards of nanoparticles used in the food industry. Search the following terms and titles on YouTube. Dane Wigington and geoengineeringwatch.org. Michael Levin. Cell intelligence in physiological and morphological spaces. Evolution. Basal cognition and regenerative medicine. Xenobots. 3.0. Living robots that can reproduce. Cognitive light cones of the self. Author tunnel opening ceremony. Fool. These are the terms to go ahead and search on YouTube. And then on to scripture. All right, so in the International Version, the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Genesis 11, verse 6. Today, scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments. They wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. Nikola Tesla. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. 1 Timothy 6, verse 20. New American Standard Bible. That is, the one whose coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders. King James Bible. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 9. Anima. Psychoanalysis. In Jungian psychology, the feminine part of a man's personality, part of the psyche that is directed inward, in touch with the subconscious. Persona. An anima which switch roles and merge in slow, smooth ways. Historical philosophy. Soul, especially the irrational part of the soul as distinguished from the rational mind. Deleterious effects. It being a particularly high concept form of craft that so much has been sociologically positioned as designation of valid or valuable, or at the very least validated artistic temperament, more so as part of the gesture of the court of popularity where everything is a mockery, defined by temperaments rather than substance. Supposed consensus being promoted at the hand of a critique that depends on politicism, popularity, and vain words of aristocracy. To deter the natural formation of a civilization by or towards a whim of vanity, in this case under the guise of artistic temperament, and its most dangerous form of societal proportion of influence, persuasion. While David Copperfield was an illusionist in order to persuade his audience that what was occurring had a seeming key of illusion, that was the entirety of the prestige of what was established to be an illusion. and entertainment in respect of the audience. That was that he presenting was by no means a deception, because he clearly states that it's an elaborate concerted depiction of the dynamics of presentation. The animation. The materialistic accessibility of creature comfort ideation that blissfully formed on the image of the screen, clinging to a supposed ideal, artfully aestheticized, the dream of a fantasy coming true enamors the viewer, an adaptation of seamless storytelling from the viewpoint of animation, but is disproportioned by immediate contrived dialogue and stark changes in theme and presentation that turns the entire storytelling into a craft. The Michael Bay effect, for which he was well known for, in dramatizing every scene into a climactic plot arc, has an almost transcendent effect through the banner of the Japanese pride of tempering and disciplining all things to the point of bringing shame to a house, is a common notion of Japanese cultural vantage. But Japan has sociological misconstrued politicisms involved within its expression as well. The psychology. The inversion of Japanese family values is highly condensed, as the sociological warfare varies greatly on the degree against competence, and tension forming a fever pitch of outlet necessity for which why Japanese animation culture is so over the top with primordial archaic levels of no ground barrier of subject or taboo. For whatever reason, Japan had also made actual pornographic nudity censored in Japan, possibly for the underlying cause of having sexually frustrated men taking further measures of suggestion to relieve their inability to fortify their sexual integrity. In a morally ambiguous juxtaposed affirmation for excellence in a wonderland of unreality that abstracts the values of Eastern religious ideals, whether culturally philanthropized or religiously consecrated into the culture. Japan does not have the racial demographic of competitive tribalistic sociology attached to it, as America. Also known as racism is even divisive within people of same skin, same facial features, same country lineage, and subdivides by negation of cultural differentiation, informing intellectual discomfort cohabiting with others who are human, different from you in some manner. A true spiritual dilemma with the edifice of resolve appropriated by authentic and presupposition maturity. Nationalism is tribalism on a dumber or unethical ballot many a time. It has positives in that if truth is adhered, then truth will be honored. So a nation can be of vitality outside of peers, of support, of affluence, even when popularity, raging immaturity, intemperance, and substance, which is the framework for the substance of God's grace coming through the earth. There being a desire to live. I say this because nationalism is agreeing to be tribalistic based on instated diplomacy. Words having meaning or meaning something, or words indeed being special as language is indeed sacred, substance of what we cannot take with us and is not understood because of what cannot be appreciated today in this day and age because it isn't, especially Thanksgiving, which is autonomous, bearing towards the opposite of narcissism. New King James Version. Jesus answered and said to them, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this." John 13:7. New King James Version. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. Matthew 21:43. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, and did not see it, to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. Matthew 13:17. What you do here affects the heavens and your eternal life. I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who have no need of repentance. Luke 15:7. Surely I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Matthew 18:18. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6:12. Hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it you do not discern this time? Luke 12, Luke 12:56. Face of the sky, cosmology, face of the earth, geography. Question posed, stating that what one does is valid. The altar. An altar in the proper sense was an unhewed stone by which had the most natural formality to which one would provide an offering of appreciation or grace to God, a communion. In a sense, a proper formality of relationship from a son to his father, in respect and not of disrespect. Reason why we capitalized the F in father to give a true stance of significance. Given a father indeed is a life-affirming guide for his children and not a biological donor without any adherence to what universally consists of father. In occultism, an altar many a times is a fragmentation of the personality and stalker-handler means of sequestering a person's sensibilities towards a fear of something, whether imagined or real, causing the person to deny their natural sensibilities due to psychological coercion and traumatic psychological abuse. What should be understood universally is that occultism has negating derogatory association, as it is emphatically related to secret things of negating derogatory, subversive nature and deception, corruption, usually over prolonged periods of time where the person is consistently persecuted or abused. The themes of anime consistently present and convey these concepts to the viewer in an effort to affect viewer sensibility to become desensitized to the psychological attacks of the so-called entertainment media's themes presentation as it is found in other forms of media and what comes from the American television and film industry. Progression of American industry onslaughts 1990s forward. Slasher films, the 2000s infatuation of cinema revolving around genres of torture referred and categorized psychological thrillers that could not be identified as so since they revolved around the theme of kidnap, psychological torture, and physical torture in the form of machinations of a serial killer who liked to play with his victims by manipulating them into believing that they were receiving retribution for their mistakes, negligence, sins, by cruel contraptions where the person had to make a choice to mutilate or inflict themselves in order to justify their salvation, as though a form of penance, when penance is not self-afflicting affliction, but as part of an act of contrition, as in patience and trial and judgment. Act of contrition being the release of and to repentance, which provides full recovery and progression towards catharsis of the soul and reconstitution of the body, whether it be of the person or an entire nation. The stark mode of bringing religious themes originating with the film Seven, whose director David Fincher had also began as an MTV music video director. Deranged morality misappropriated to the seeming black psychology that is counter to Christianity, but borrowing from its staffhold of heritage in themes and principles that the person is paying for their sins. In reality, it's a story about a deranged individual who has kidnapped individuals to fulfill his pathos of sadistic curiosity. In doing so, forming the same proclivities of vicarious intrigue and garnering a taste of the stark theme's interest in what was not part of the person's viewer's temperaments, as in the individual was much healthier before being consistently promoted a false art form that cannot objectively be called entertainment. The examples of what duress and coercion millennials had to go through was the unleashing of supposed shows for kids like Ren Stimpy, unrestrained lunacy, and graphic lasciviousness portraying intense inferences of perversion and promotion of disturbing modalities of mental illness with realistic depictions of consequential effects of cruelty, violence towards the ones being carried on. Rocco's Modern Life, nerve-wracking anxiety induction, and inordinate romance placed momentarily, insinuating visceral eroticism, instances brushing past the theme only sufficiently in a way that the child might garner a subconscious temperament for them that leaves the undeveloped mind uncertain towards pursuit of disseminated intimacy through a superficial means. It has opened the door to developing erroneous lifelong infatuation towards the longing of catching the wind due to loss of inner child's healthy progression. It takes the form of futility of a worn-out yearning in later years, begins to take more serious forms of behavioral dysfunction, deleterious reserves of melancholic catharsis that because they have become compulsion reactions, cease their function as part of healing of the mind or emotional body and become traumatic themselves. Healing modality of catharsis no longer retrievable because the person has developed entirely around the fragmentation of the emotional body of these effects and has formed a course of pathology that is no longer retrievable of the individual's original goal, have made contact with the missing pieces of lingering wounds that have run their course to mend, brokenness that cannot be identified because the grasp of emotional memory is lost and disfigured by further development of society's etiquette in promoting inadequacy and glamorizing the trivialization of insult to its injury, societal norm, as well as further personal disappointment and bad decision making, where the inner body is no longer seen as something to conserve or retrieve the loss of self respect. Anime specifically pursues these very expressions in an endless mirage of satiation of actual life affirming pursuits merely as Kraft's plot device, provided as slice of life that has its own genre, but is the main cathartic tool used. Thought to be substance, but is only a menial allowance of natural expression of character development, as the characters are designed to be modalities and motifs, but are rarely oriented towards self-expression. The gimmicks of using the panicky adolescent young adult who is continuously exposed to aspects of women's sexuality and always has the neurotic reaction of having seemingly an aversion to what is mostly women undressing themselves momentarily is a common motif revolving high school-like themes, usually forming a stagnant immaturity around the concept of young adult male and female relationships, as the male character has this continuous superficial brushing with female sexuality and reinforced the same neurosis revolving the female form. Even this is crafted with a sort of unnecessary sexual frustration that whether 2000s or 2020s is still reiterated, providing hardly anything to the substance of the show, but instead focuses the viewer on sexual frustration itself, as the male-female relationship is always a sort of burlesque show around surface level noticing of sexuality as a ever present theme which always alludes towards the notion of vicarious perversion, even if it isn't. The unsaid use of psychology that is thickly applied makes anime a craft as it always takes the substance and adds selling points of gimmicks which could be called fan service, but is mostly applied to frustrate the viewer into a carrot on a stick form and an ever-present impediment towards sexual maturity. The anime progressively forms schism towards psychology of sexuality and its entire goal and purpose, maturity. Anime progressively forms schism towards the psychology of sexuality and its entire goal and purpose, maturity. Many shows, whether Japanese or American, have these themes of continuous dilemma that cannot be cathartically resolved and ended and presumed as c'est la vie, such as life, and other comforting notions habituated as an affirmation of norm, when really continuously watching of these modalities of character is acclimating the viewer towards the same. Metaphysics forming as some metaphysics forming as some would say life imitating art if only it was, it not being art, craft, and so predisposes the viewer to witchcraft through modalities by enchantment, temptation, and persuasion essential. Some mere examples which is written across the board of every kind of animated contemporary storytelling has a motif of an achievable goal iterated as the standard of its main plot, delineation, and conclusion. While yes, people will defend that these are organic, spontaneous, thought-out forms of storytelling, this is not usually so, especially when large amounts of money are funneled into a project's production. As screenwriters and producers do not simply talk creativity in the plot drawing board or screenwriting room. The seeming universal existential concept of a paradox where life is not without its thorns and thistles, unavoidable is colored in most formats of contemporary storytelling, giving the viewer the presumption that because that is how society has been conditioned, it must be a normal part of life itself. Such examples would be Tom and Jerry. Tom is always Tom is always trying to gain one over on Jerry, sometimes not even predatorily, but seemingly have a social relationship of some sort. Even so, many a times Tom's motives isn't to get Jerry or eat him. In others, Jerry seems to be the one who's getting Tom in trouble when Tom is minding his own business. Same format is found in Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, which were produced by MGM Studios and Warner Brothers as the main consistency of theme across most original classic cartoons by the company and era, all the way to shows that were not very popular and weren't meant to be such much later in the 90s, Where in the World is Cameron Sandiego, where two young adult detectives are attempting to capture a spy, but the idea was she gets away every time. The show used the plot to educate the audience on history and geography as it was usually a means of locating her. These themes are taken lightly yet produce a strong conveyance in the subconscious of utility, taking on a metaphysical effect. As a supposed facet of nature or a natural expression of reality's nature, as a complacency towards unresolved of matters thought of being natural, is more or less affirming and insisting that life is in the consistency of the unparalleled view of the cartoon. While the producers of the entertainment industry have a larger scope of a view of how life works, and what in that while it presents an issue or dilemma, What is usually left out is the resolve of time. It's a small world after all, is the incoherent establishment of entertainment industry's goal, goal, hello, 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 goal, hello. It's small world after all, is the incoherent establishment of the entertainment industry's goal, which is stated and affirmed by many books of both corporate business official publishing and investigations of conglomerate entertainment agendas, as one will look at certain moderately fact-checked information in one's own research or investigations and find that yes, the History Channel is owned by Disney, and Disney having garnered nearly the entirety of a Western entertainment industry's infrastructure. What has been stated is the ancestral traditions of civilizations are to be homogenized into an aesthetically inclined superficiality, no longer represents history and the natural formation of civilization by organizations such as the Committee of 300. The Magic Kingdom. There is no business like show business is a common phrase that essentially captures the message of the entertainment industry. That seemingly is claiming its activity of making money out of vanity, more making markets from aesthetic that mirrors the authentic, but has a modality of giving with one hand while taking with the other, essentially the act of a magic trick, and is essentially the capitalism of charlatanism, and is essentially the capitalism of charlatanism. One of the fads that captured the apparent second golden age of cinema in two words was the short-lived Planet Hollywood that has mainly remained in Las Vegas after attempting to expand with sponsoring four of Hollywood's most influential prominent archetypal expressions of its modernity: Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, and then spouse Demi Moore. Much of what runs through series, regardless of era of modern entertainment, today have a dissolute nature of schism, being a natural state of existence. Much of what runs through series, regardless of era of modern entertainment today, have a dissolute nature of schism, being a natural state of existence. Does the slide of design have a metaphysical backing towards affecting the viewer? Who would know more than those who work in the business of entertainment media? With a consistency of a degree where most media makes mockery of philosophical ponderings, never really answers them. Social media more or less has continued the trend as most people post thoughtlessly or sociopathically, as sociopathic behavior has been trivialized to the point of being glamorized, glorified, and celebrated, honoring people as legends for insulting one another. People have garnered the notion that disrespecting people is worthy of praise. The thing is that it is this very action as why society has not recovered from its societal illness, whether it be of social media toxicity, that is the progression of the expressions presented to us from exploitative social commentary, reality television programs, glorify provocation, disgrace, such as Jerry Springer, Maury, where people are encouraged to prostitute their intimate, personal, societal, familial relationships and propagate a shameless atmosphere of gossip and vindication that even the audience attend only for the attempt to channel frustration and angst as though getting back at society for having had endured its life imitating art. entertainment industry craft, societal illness, to which they are apathetic to, but are willing to participate in its transgression of reveling in its ignorance as though virtue. There is a stereotype of every generation prior having been better or criticized by the latter. This is found to be reaching a true plateau since essentially the mainstream launching of the internet has made for a reorganizing of culture that is unadaptive to life itself. In essence, all of the extinguishable overindulgent exaggerations and caricatures of cultural fiascos, travesties of the 1900s, spun out of control into social norms that are being unattended. Its maturity would have done just fine in resolving the entirety of the issue, rather than attempting to redefine that as well. The inability to resist rebelliousness coalescing due to an affinity for immaturity, which is in fact a tail-end sign of criminal psychopathy, as a person enjoys doing the wrong thing, knowing it is wrong, because it is wrong. In other words, the individual has a fondness for transgression simply because it is a transgression. The visceral primitive enjoyment of doing something destructive. Its defiance. Vanity that is attributed merely to pride has been our greatest downfall, as character immediately erodes to the worst case scenario of a person's trajectory once they have accepted and embraced the enjoyment of doing evil as pleasure. I've seen my share of people in this vein, that because they are defined as defiance or vanity, are seen as visionaries of an aristocracy that require participation of others in vitriol as their anarchist playgrounds isn't fulfilling without imposing the relevance by insulting others' state. I've seen my share of people in this vein, because they are defined as defiance for vanity, are seen as visionaries of an aristocracy that require the participation of others in vitriol as their anarchist playground isn't fulfilling without imposing the relevance by insulting others' estate. Seamlessly assaulting others to eradicate their existence isn't the goal. Sadism, sully, slander. This goes beyond explaining away delinquency as part of human nature. It has to do more with external realities of greater expressions of consciousness that are absolute in integrity, being of, or not. I complete, I, a complete skewing of the faculties of volition towards rebelliousness being propagated as visionaries. Complete skewing of the faculties of volition towards rebelliousness being propagated as visionary, innovative, noble, creative, heroic, and given the benefit of the doubt as misunderstood can only be abided and condoned for so long before it becomes merely an affirmation of murder, which is Hollywood's main interest, to trivialize murder to the point that it may get away with any crime openly without having to even save face for seeming apologetic. The actuations of these demeanors were expressed unapologetically by those we revere so much for boldly making their statements with a solemn sense of dignity in film to why we find relevant. Acting is not a noble profession. It's a self-enabling reach to actualize narcissism. If they didn't love themselves so much, they would not be promoting themselves as the product of grandeur to be glorified as the representation of relevance itself. Social media has allowed for everyone to become their own supposed god, celebrity, star, or any other form of sense of superstardom, and has made the way for outlandish hedonism to rule over reason. While psychologists explain away it being part of human nature, as though shrugging their shoulders that it's getting worse, being a building on fire that is reaching ever nearer to the point of objectively making the observation that the asylum was more sane than the ones caring for it since it was in their court to have made a proper evaluation of the situation, since the mind health practitioners are in consensus that somehow the current trajectory of its say is not a reflection of their own mental health. Fair observance of societal approval by psychology referential public address would be the statement that has been promoted somewhat that masturbation is healthy. In truth, masturbation is possibly the greatest great gateway drug, as it causes social anxiety due to peripheral humiliation by condoning denaturing biological personality functions by depersonalization of blurring the lines, personal acceptance of the activity itself. Activity, personal acceptance of the activity itself. Depression, all other major compulsive behavior, and leading to need for rehabilitation of unacceptable sexual degeneracy, habituation, and frequency of act that counters towards public sexual inappropriateness, sexual criminality. Just because it's socially accepted doesn't mean it's sane. In counter observance, it's been said and shown that maintaining sexual fortitude usually provides for a life affirming sensibility that does not dwindle into procreation becoming menial by recreation to the point that while we live in an unnatural world of possibly billions of videos of sexual intercourse on the internet, more than on occasion we lose interest and find ourselves in a lax sense of enthusiasm and subconsciously anxiety-ridden state when met with the real acquaintance of the opposite sex. It is apparent beyond scope of personal observation that sexual fortitude and integrity acclimates itself to be of a desirability that is irresistible to even the most stout, as this emphasizes something of substance that naturally transcends man from the animal kingdom towards something known as one characteristic of transcendent sexual purity. I suppose the reason being that it leaves the entirety of the room to every other kind of expression to be affirmed. Note that children usually come about by a lack of control and is celebrated out of wedlock, wedlock being the affirmed grasp as to making conceiving of another possible to be a healthy in any way. I don't mean to spend much more time on the discussion of this topic more than simply viewing others through a screen, or worse, in person in the sexual act, is highly unnatural, and while it is a form of voyeurism, the fact that it is the act of participating in agreed prostitution as a third party rather fourth, as what most fail to notice is that what is being recorded and observed is filming by possibly more than one individual who is also in the room with which the prostitution is occurring. I suppose the shame is natural to such an unnatural societal dysfunction. A viewing of prostitution as the word pornography, or rather pornea, means whoredom. Simply the missing pieces of the natural act of having met someone and learning to socialize have been eradicated by these means. Whether provocative or not, now most media depends on this quality as social political agendas are presented specifically in entertainment for the reason of provocation. And not much else today since most forms of television series and cinema don't really make much more of an effort but this. Usually anime is less focused on personality development, which is common in American cartoon animation. Usually anime is less focused on personality development. Usually anime is less focused on personality development, which is common in American cartoon animation, but is usually more goal-oriented. Anime that is personality-oriented is long and far as it requires deeply thought-out character personalization that reflects real sentiments the producers are fully aware they can provide a show with, but the point of anime is not to inspire the viewer to walk outside and leave the television set altogether, but to watch series after series that maintain the same dopamine exerting intricacy of intrigue, to want to watch more reimaginings of the same. Seemingly, the apparent reflection of real life moments that elusively pass as being plot devices merely to carry on the story are designed with mostly hyper-expressive aesthetic of characters' sensual attraction, an aimless drawing of an emotive in replacement of substance, creating elating of the intimate part of the anima that because has no meaning becomes a media-induced altered state, the enchantment. The animation and emotional satiation facilitates a drug-like effect of relevance that, for lack of a better word, are enchanting reveries of fantasy seemingly foreplaying with the desire of coming true, although in the hands of someone who is not intending to entertain or honor the viewer, rather play with their psychology and makeup by vanitizing the intimate sentiments of the inner child, or to a degree the core of the self, in a dark room as to gain the full possible effect of acclimating a person to an altered state of mind. It is not necessarily hypnotic, but from the loud explosive speaker system to the entire presentation of manipulation and contortion of perception to whatever degree that what is going on the picture is larger than life. The overuse of sound effects Overuse of sound effects to the point of exceeding computer-generated graphics is an example of how contorted the use of these faculties of the movie theater are. The spiritual aspect is that the viewer is embodied as a vehicle for further expression of the energy of the media format as the person is being facilitated to a simulated near-life experience. Furthermore, thoughts and attitudes are exclusively influenced by television and online media. Our entire culture is, as it stands in this day, as a result of manufacturing by free market capitalization of psychology ideologies dispersed to mitigate a spiritual climate that is in denial of its existence. Even so, self-respect, redefined as self-exaltation, and the attractive term used in education as self-actualization, to assert oneself in society, rather than self-acclamation, to know oneself. It's my contention that these shows were designed to form these very pathologies in order to form butterflies out of the incubating minds of children to become moth-ridden social fabric that maintains the industry's agenda to capture progression of mental health of society into sociological schema of expendable members of controlled chaos. This very effect is found throughout many children's shows of entertainment where the child is exposed just enough to form a lifelong pursuit of garnering lost pieces of emotional body that been broken and never capture or fulfill the drives the person is spurred by. The shows in themselves to fulfill a lifelong pursuit find the wall at the end of the road of society's top games being a farce, contrived political bureaucracy. Many fall to drug self-medicating and sexual promiscuity, also known as sex kittens. for the use of other disordered societal illnesses, sociological exploitation. In this overlaid format of misconstrued partialness of life to contrive partiality, that which is not of. Freedom of creativity that echo chambers all of the corporate formulations of self and templates of fashion that ideally had stood for something before aesthetic became more relevant of characteristic of quality than authentic. The modern zeitgeist being adolescence. The 80s marked the beginning of this sociological magic trick of selling the ideas of relevance that were organizing, grassroots stabilizing some true identity of culture after the 60s and 70s unreality onslaught, mitigated by worldwide doping of drugs by government agencies, which I will discuss in another chapter. Identified, the identity of the adolescent was immediately captured. The identity of the adolescent was immediately captured and glorified and emphasized as flamboyant statements as fashion took over the remnants of the counterculture renegade onslaughts of domestic organizations that were and still are in charge of recreating the ritual of drug celebration festivals as the revolving door of culture, fashion, in the view of normal continuing to fall into the purview of pharmacological agents as the enticing ruse for society to ponder, while its curiosity and benefit of any sort have been completely expunged, sterilized after being systematically smeared of having any benefit by the festivals themselves, mitigating the so-called culture of a people who once believed it's their right to live a life, to slap a sticker on their car and live by the words born to be wild, to now Forever 21, as conglomerate design has become religion. And while part of the etiquette is to deny it as vanity, narcissism, the religion itself. Narcissism being the religion itself. Um, Cliche that had run its course in less than 12 years of putting on a shirt or social media outlet stating, I am my own God, isn't even fashionable anymore. More so, mainstream acceptance of these substances are being cleverly once again maintaining a tantalizing politicism of having a sociological approval, finally, as a false soma of some sort. Although it cannot be condoned, especially universally, that pharmacological therapy is the answer in most cases, the addition of people having been incarcerated near lifelong sentences for being in possession of deforming cults of temporal lunacy, as it is in some clarity that the acceptance of these highly paradigm-shifting pharmacological agents now being approved as acceptable psychotherapies is a farce, a counterculture facade. The propaganda that if you are to do a drug, it is promoted to be done excessively without any consideration for falls into further deplorability, whether it be Burning Man, Cheech and Chong, Tomorrowland, Coachella Festival, regardless of all modern music being a statement that adolescence is the most important time of one's life, from which, because it works so well, the majority of society has never recovered a view of it not being run by adolescent sentiments, and that our 20s are not a graduation to adolescence itself. In our 30s, not a decision to affirm the esteem of having lived a wild life in a meritable as though life decision as though navigating one's entirety of prime adulthood was only a development of adolescent delinquency, while most having irreconcilable irreconcilable regrets of having been a casualty of misguidance, deception so clear that its silver lining was always in plain sight. The Department of Psychology being more of mass cognitive dissonance than any other. Final statement should be well understood that there is no such thing as a recreational drug. First, first adult cartoon sitcom that craftily placed itself as being somehow family oriented. Simpsons. Ambiguous rebelliousness and constant insinuation of questionable social norms that focus the subconscious on lack of integrity, all others in the show leaving room for the suggestion of the philosophical questionability of character, society as a whole. SpongeBob SquarePants. A slighted amalgamation of the former aforementioned shows, including Ren Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life, with tabloid-induced non-related politicisms of sexuality. What people aren't aware is that the voice actor of SpongeBob SquarePants, Tom Kenny, came out in an early 90s HBO skit show called Mr. Show that in the third season, episode 1, plays a televangelist for Satanism shouting Hail Satan many times throughout the skit, in addition to an upside down pentagram, circle theft by demonic request, and the back. The end credits have David Cross giving a short apologetic for the rights of others to believe whatever they like and should be respected in rhetoric fashion. The show featured earlier appearances of Jack Black, who had also later came out in an MTV Awards ceremony openly promoting Satanism in a cartoon for children-like caricature, wear, attire in 2009 in promotion of a video game featuring him. Both are two of the leading entertainers in youth entertainment as of 2000s, with Billy West, who was the main voice actor for Ren and Stimpy, and many other cartoons being probably the most influential. He is considered the contemporary Mel Blanc and has played Looney Tune characters at the prime of their popularity during the 90s, and has consistently played the Eminem character which millennials and Zoomers have been raised with. These three figures have single-handedly raised a large demographic of both the TV watching population of the millennials and early Zoomers at infancy, particularly Tom Kenny, who was the main talent for Rocko's Modern Life and SpongeBob. I chose these three shows as example as most other American cartoons developed had followed their coattails of motif in one way or another and have formed a lineup of mind-contorting mental illness filled followings into the new millennium post 2000s. Ren Stimpy was developed by MTV Studios. MTV being a Freemasonic expenditure in its flagship of cultural crusade of cultural deterioration as attack towards future generations to ensure its dominance and influence over the masses during this critical century of vast importance. We ask ourselves why is most of what is put out by the entertainment industry trash? We ask ourselves why is most of the film and television industry not able to produce anything of proper value, it being they can funnel millions, close to $1 billion into a film or entertainment production, but have seemingly missed the point of producing a piece of work that can be legitimately called art. It's because the goal was never to entertain the viewer or provide one's best work as something to honor the viewer, to affect them, to socially acclimate them, to psychologically alter them. Yet while the goal isn't to social engineer precisely, to create a parasitical relationship upon the viewer, many a time as most of the entertainment that we have had has been force-fed one way or another. Examples of uh, force, examples of hello, force-fed psychology in American media. Harry Potter, which includes actual incantations and spells and practices found in black magic manuals and possible lore of witches who past existed. Pop stars and rap, besides each having their own saga of taking up the majority of people's interest in life, are shown continuously to the public, whether a Nickelodeon childhood actor turned rapper or Disney Club children forming lifelong arching careers posing as adolescent figures, the sudden innovators of social reform and political voices from MTV personalities that garner their influence to further propagate the same such like figures sampled from the population as though idols. I use Ashton Kutcher as an example of the culture being magnified specifically with the reason as I've met many who have embodied personality of his caricatures of adolescence, being something mainstream enough and yet embodying personality of counterculture at the same time, more so simply an accepted view of mainstream rebelliousness. The actual personalities of the sampling to propagate more of the same, usually being much more volatile, wild, and uncontrollable. People are keen to notice control as a reason to reject this entire writing, as and flourish a wild child apologetic of mostly a run-down dry well of disingenuous politicisms, reinforcing the embracing of immaturity. When I mean self-control, which has been the main eye of discourse in view of the public, all of this intrusive dispensation of media claiming to be art, culture is to garner the emotional and spiritual complacency for the people to be that one should not have self-control. Seemingly that is the entire message. As having a lack of self-control or governance would mean and justify the reasoning for having another take away one's sovereignty and right to self. Reason why the adolescent has been held in prolific high esteem of its hormonal behavioral idiosyncrasies. It's the perfect motif to deliver a message of to lose control, lost, lose yourself, to lose focus, to lose understanding, lose authority, lose significance of the autonomy of self-control. The casinos of vice are open 24 hours. What has not been told to the person in a redeeming non-pack alpha maleism is that as a stripper strips you of your money, so does vice and lack of self-control strip you of your very substance. What makes you you? Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds in the air. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, and yet their heavenly fathers feed them. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Matthew 12:12. How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And why do you worry about clothes? Consider how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his glory was adorned like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown in the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles strive after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Matthew 6:28, verse 33. Clothes being a reference to style, uniqueness, beauty, or substance. Garments are also many a times being used interchangeably as a reference to, sometimes literally reference to. The Hebrew people were not nudists, seemingly seemingly without such apparel like the spiritual materialism of Pharmakia. It is stating so that not even Solomon was a user of such things that are reference to the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as we do today. What must be understood is that psychedelics such as use of magic mushrooms and other theogens were known in the ancient world. Were not unknown in the ancient world. The Holy Bible simply doesn't condone such things and is essentially telling the person the truth that even though you don't see these things, your substance is still there. Verse 32 being a direct affirmation of this. For the Gentiles strive after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Seemingly stating both the material and immaterial. The affluence of grandeur of the sunrise, sunset, and even the incandescence of the moon. In a world not as developed as ours, yes, people held style and clothing in high regard. Seemingly, we have taken our spiritual materialism to levels of vanity that have made for a bombastic colliding of a party as though a car had run into someone's living room, or rather a pitcher of artificially colored water saying, oh yeah, as though life was that easy. I would say, I would like to save my commentary of the Pharmakia for another chapter, but I will say this. Taking dimethyltryptamine and similar entheogens, or I suppose appropriately called psychedelics, as they psych you out by fluctuating unnatural stimulation of sensory receptors, gives the illusion that one is experiencing something profound, seemingly only provides a disoriented temporary glimpse of what substance is there. Nevertheless, taking dimethyltryptamine and similar entheogens is simulating a near-death experience, as DMT activity is thought to be most pronounced at 2 points in one's life, birth and at death. Scientific medical literature is undecided on whether this is true. DMT models the near-death experience. The term near-death experience was coined by philosopher Raymond Moody more than 40 years ago. Remarkably, the overlap between the phenomenology of the classic serotonergic psychedelic experience and NDEs was highlighted by Moody himself more than 4 decades ago. And these similarities have formed the basis of a popular hypothesis on the pharmacology of NDEs that endogenous DMT is released in significant decon- that endogenous DMT is released in significant concentrations during the dying process. Strasman, 2001, with C. Nichols, 2017, for a critique of this hypothesis. The psychological state produced by the DMT containing Amazonian brew, ayahuasca, a literal translation of ayahuasca from Quechua, is the vine of the dead, or the vine of the soul, has also been linked to themes of death and dying. Shannon, 2005. As have psychedelics in general, uh, Millier, 2017, with the psychology of psychedelic-induced ego death, being likened to that of actual death. Leary, 2008. Ashton Kutcher went from being one of the most irreverent figures on television promoting the American stereotype of a deadbeat, low IQ, mischievous cherry hound Uh, um, the American stereotype of a deadbeat, low IQ, mischievous cherry hound on that '70s show, an encouragement of prank playing in similar persona as to punk or disrespect someone in MTV Punk'd, the mind contorting MK Ultra films such as The Butterfly Effect, that was thought to be a psychological thriller but had more of a rooting in an exercise of self-induced traumatic memory recall by hypnosis, as though traveling back in time with major themes of childhood traumatic events, including child sexual abuse exploitation, life-changing life-changing physical injury to false illusionary concepts of catharsis, and there being catharsis in the futility of ever having had a relationship with his childhood friend, to an alternate ending, which was suicide by attempting to alter the past so that he may not be born. From this to being the face of Steve Jobs in film, as though reforming his character, as seen in a multitude of people's careers, where they switch roles from being a not necessarily controversial figure, but an irreverent one, that because they are held in esteem for being irreverent to the to the concept of respect, are provided with a publishing of promotion as controversial, to entice public sentiments towards a hype of excitement and gossip. Acting is not a respectable profession, contribution, or of any redeeming character. Mel Gibson quotes, "Acting is like lying, the art of lying well, and paid to tell elaborate lies." She's not the only one who said this, but I'll just leave it at that for now. The Butterfly Effect came out at the peak of Ashton Kutcher's garnering. The Butterfly Effect came out at the peak of Ashton Kutcher's garnering of adolescent and young adult popularity. Even I was looking forward to what he might do in a serious film role, and yet the entirety of his big screen debut was shock value. Psychological thriller films depict surreal ambiguity of uncertainty of mental illness, and themes of time travel and questionability of actuality of events taking place. More importantly, having the viewer indwelled with an association, more importantly, having the viewer indwelled with an association of intellectual and emotional captivation based on the intrigue of uncertainty of a mysterious event. By this categorization, I suppose is why these films are called psychological thrillers. An example would be 12 Monkeys, where there is no catharsis in the film and ends the same way that it begins, with the memory of the protagonist having witnessed his own death, endearingly embraced by the only woman who he would know as an adult in the same formality as the Bambi. Examples of this form of cinematic plot utilization can be found in The Lion King, as it was recalled that when the film had come out in theaters, there was a demographic of having at least one or two children in the theater's audience who would cry after the scene of Simba's father dying, Mufasa. Um, the film has a multitude of psychological trauma incorporated designs, as Terry Gilliam's films usually incorporate hysterical modes of storytelling, subject, subject matter, surrealism, lunacy, variants of certainty and intrigue of uncertain plot delineation, and plot development based on the character's knowledge of awareness as the main film's focus and theme of film's interest is to maintain the audience in the same neurosis as many psychological thrillers had the motif of ending with the notion of the cognitive dissonance that began. Were things resolved? Was the preceding events of any reconciliation? Did they occur at all? Who was the antagonist since the theme is completely pervading around the hanging notion of some forensic final detail, but in the end, film makes the effort to create a greater urgency of mystery of what was originally a simple matter of deceit in presentation and storytelling. Was there a redeeming conclusion that the film was emphatically stating something about reality being redeemable? The spiritual wind pervading and the misdirection of a life being directed or emphasized incorrectly or incoherently. While Terry Gilliam is known for his cartoon-like cinematography, followers of similar motifs between one and another designated garnering artistic landmark of cinematic expression. Christopher Nolan, who incorporates both a realistic grittiness likened to David Fincher's extremism of facilitating societal themes into plateaus of realistic societal consequence, in seamless realism and seamless emphasis of complexity. His first three films revolving entirely around the inversion of psychological illness. One having criminal intent to prove relevance of life by making a religious statement based on serial murder, including martyrdom to transgression as consecration to the act of a sick apotheosis, in where the antagonist becomes the main character at the end of the film, in having began what he ended by having himself be the final piece of his work of being a finely thought out concept. That films costing over $1 million would mean that there would be a thinking out process of a concept may be what meet, may be, which may be what meets more than the eye. The second, a simulated psychoanalysis of society norms being therapeutically cured by continuous stalker-handler technique of an individual whose wealth is the subject of a supposed aspect of pathos of suit and tie callousness, be cured in order to gain reconciliation to sight of his humanity and catharsis of childhood witnessing of parent suicide, Bambi effect. And the third, um, schizophrenic sociopathology being the answer and savior of modern man by revolution and unhinged self-destruction in a crescendo of domestic chaos organization or politically termed domestic terrorism, being the answer to the societal impediments of institute incorporatism obscuring man's identity and humanity. One of the most informal personifications of rebellion and the devil on film, a demonic figure an imaginary companion of the possession of possession, whose main character has no verifiable name and his imaginary friend's name Tyler. Self-improvement is masturbation. Now self-destruction might be the answer. Quote unquote. A seeming fill lyric for the time's self-loathing affirmations of seeming infatuation with catharsis of the self, which had not been such a pronounced conveyance of contemplation in times before, since people were not so personally involved as being sophisticated by prioritizing greater sense of personality, world expression, and the theme of disillusionment having become marketable as well as social alienation. Things that were trusted began to lose their slip on reality as vice became more accessible in life societally. Life coming to light, life can and is very subjective to points of uncommon experience is great possibility of the physical existence and otherwise. Depth was affirmed by a different lens of substance that I can only imagine that authenticity must have reigned in a world unconnected. Since this statement doesn't even make an impression today, it certainly did at the climax end of an offline world before 2000s. In all three David Fincher films, the answer to the main character or problem is suicide. Teenage angst having sociologically reached its final mark of inclined political importance before being politically disenfranchised as a triviality of popularity mainstream commercialism in the 2000s, as Hot Topic teenage stores being made the place for acceptance of unacceptance fashion statements. There's a final statement in the last year of that decade, and also ending with a scene of the Twin Towers of Commerce being demolitioned, as well as similar themes in the author's sequential book released that same year of plane hijacking, death cult raised individual working as part of criminal organization, as a housekeeper who becomes a Joel Osteen, Tony Robbins like religious figure who is a emasculinated virgin whose particular sentiments are also written to give the reader a sense of being in touch with her inner loser. Since that is what mostly propagated in the media for the age demographic of the 90s, of those who had grown up in it. So that is what was mostly propagated in the media for the age demographic of the 90s, of those who had grown up in it. The land of milk and honey began to fade as the land of milk and honey began to fade as the 2000s no longer had a cohesive sense of founding as friends, relationships, accessibility of levels of unimagined simulated explorations, and every fiendish thing would be mitigated online. Dance music festivals became more and more common, with DJ culture becoming at times even more popular than music itself, all perpetrated by a level of vanity that was only enabled by a commercialism mirroring a renaissance of a unsignaled magic kingdom mitigated by drugs. All perpetrated by a level of vanity that was only enabled by a commercialism mirroring a renaissance of an unsignaled magic kingdom mitigated by drugs. You lived in the world of a tree of life, or you lived in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where evil loses its meaning and anything becomes good. Now, in the 2020s, we had gone from having one specific having her own magazine forwarded to the front Whole Foods market year long, venerating the death of a sitcom star for more than a quarter of the length of a year, whose only contribution was being a sarcastic, thoughtless personality, has purportedly died, even though Hollywood is known for its celebrities faking their own deaths, marriages, sex preferences, names, backgrounds, success stories. Rap being, rap being simply the promotion of violence and crime, casual charlatanism, by garnering rap being simply the promotion of violence and crime, casual charlatanism, by garnering the music of others to make cavalier, self-inflammatory statements, by having a knack for being able to swell up with hubris into showing prose and skill in disrespect demeanor, to muster as much vanity in rhyming as to maintain the less than adolescent maturity of adults who have lost the notions of much else than a dart and sling thrown at them by the music that pens on levels unbeknown to man Reality has its warfare and institutes, but really in respect. Reality has its warfare in respect. As man shows contempt for nature, as because of the latitude of reality is like an eagle, psychology doesn't contribute a single thing to reality. It merely facilitates its formal simulations of pronounced denial of reality by taking a template denies the right to anything being sacred in a sense that exists, or outside of its designation of authority, as the lens through we are to see one thing is not through a sterilization of personal involvement with that which you are an intricate part of, and yet the medical industry plain feels the entire conception that as a doctor, seemingly it's a profession first and a life decision second. Whether rap can be considered hate speech, I suppose rhetoric will be a distraction for its reprisal as culture fades into tabloids unnumbered in the wind. Rock being simply the engagement of animus from self-assertion to glorifying mongrel barbarian-like violence and hate speech as well. Suicide, rape, and revenge being a latent message of subject matter that is described and promoted in all three genres by examples that I won't give because they simply are too many by too many musicians of each who usually garnish themselves accolades and sympathy by lying about their victimization to garner the spiritual emotional complacency of their following and to justify their supposed creative output. In a sense, we live in a sociological, political, spiritual axis, cult leaders, each with a congregation of persona. Andy Warholian mysticism by sunglasses and fashion on the secular side, demonic orchestration of energetic adaptation on the other. To convince is not necessary, as most have garnered their comforts from accommodating the rebellious spirits with generations of future victims and hosts propagate the same disordered expression of betrayal and discouragement of Thanksgiving. Examples of MTV entertainment: Viva La Bam, total mistreatment of family projections; Jackass, total fatal irresponsibility; Tom Green Show, total promotion of mental illness. I place this here as comparability to what is Japan's biggest entertainment export besides video games systems. Biggest entertainment export besides video game systems, right. Which, if there is a point to discuss as to the whole thing was a formality to get to the metaverse and Internet of Things. Through biometrics, engineered nanomaterials, and gene editors, 5G, 6G technology, pseudo-military communication application towers that are both connected to satellite and the technologically advanced materials running through people's bodies, we may not have a choice whether we participate in advanced pseudo-black magic technology. The stated goal by many is and has been to become gods by mass demonic communion, society or civilization as a whole, and global genocide as part of a final inclination towards ritual sacrifice, as part of a holocaust that will be the norm. The film Children of Men depicts this with the emphasized rhetoric of a child being born in a generation that has been left completely sterile, seemingly without a cause, but we live specifically in that time period where such an endeavor as or might take place by all the forced pharmacological alteration of genome of both humans, animals, produce, wildlife vegetation, while we're continuously fed concepts of godlike archaic progression of man's capacity of development that seemingly was most realistically cinematographized as to its potential in films like Chronicle. Again, because the teenager motif of a misunderstood youth is such a powerful psychological warfare strategy that has emasculinated and quickly gains validity, the expediency of emotion, satiation, over adherence of character development, unpresupposed integrity, parentheses. It becomes the main idea of adolescence being somehow the most important time in one's life and is killed by his brother in the film in order to subdue the chaos that has taken him over. And with, I'll go ahead and um, um, interject here. Um, at the end of the film, his brother takes on the role of actually reaching adult maturity, having a mature adult um, view of life as he takes off to go ahead and actually explore life after his seeming uh, transition to this other-like being that is seemingly like a Superman or what have you. You know, guy kind of just takes off flying. So um, it does measure that, how do you call it, that uh, that comparability that his younger brother was not able to go ahead and reach a maturity due to, I guess, the um, the adolescent implications of being, not accepted, alienation, etc. Just the common wherewithal, and him actually, being sort of more well. Seemingly, the simple idea is that his bigger brother actually reaches um, maturity only after having killed his younger brother in a necessity of basically um, a final fight of trying to pretty much subdue a chaos. Again, because the teenager motif of a misunderstood youth is such a powerful psychological warfare strategy that has emasculinated and quickly gains validity the expediency of emotion, satiation over adherence, of character development, unpresupposed integrity, parentheses. It becomes the main idea of adolescence being somehow the most important time in one's life and is killed by his brother in the film in order to subdue the chaos that has taken him over. With an original story of an alien intelligence likened to Terence McKenna's concepts of DMT and psilocybin mushroom entity experiences, some of the imagery of the film early on carries a similar sensibility of having made contact with the intelligence that is strange but cannot be verified to be benevolent truly or have a material finding beyond the personal scope of peripheral experience. In a similar atmospheric presentation, which I suspect was just another presentation of swaying people to a lure that takes the same direction of this to the same. After all, these are all utensils of indoctrination towards the not so wonderful world of magic. magic mushrooms and ayahuasca, and yet the voice of America is a continuous promoter and enthusiast of this, and former commentator of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, which can only mean that we're inclinating towards embracing more brutal forms of blood sport, while unreality is more the decoration of the identity of modern man, who was also a host for a so-called reality television series revolving around the psychology of fear by immersing people in these voluntary contests to win money and prizes. Sounds more like an American nightmare. The American dream was conservative in a time when men and women may not have been so seamlessly persuaded by technological accommodation and hyper-intellectual musings in professing their carelessness coexisting but are drawn towards an attitude of such expediency that throwing people under the bus is something akin to having an abortion to get a company paid vacation to another state, that while the clinic's company sells the stem cells and biological material, and reveling in the visceral arrogance of the wine of violence. Whether it's Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg musing on having a literal cage match, whether Georgia Guidestones, Aleister Crowley appearing on Beatle covers, or Beatles covers consisting of baby dolls and pieces of meat as the young men of the band smile dressed in butcher attire, and Albert Pike's Freemasonic literature stating the prediction of a civilization accepting a Luciferianism, um, in parentheses, self-worship of narcissism in a theocratic manner. As, end of parentheses, as a whole, and the prediction of the three consecutive world wars as the means to this end, people have completely given in to a sensual-driven life as the 2030s brings in a decade of vanity unmatched and swayed by a demiurge, which is a magic reference of a tide of sensual, visceral, ethereal energy continuously tiding and propagated by sexual current of societal atmosphere, attitudes, and spiritual conditioning not unlike Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, whose brother was heavy into sociology and eugenics, but has its origin in increased sex magic practice that began to proliferate to larger degrees during the beginning of the 20th century. Um, during during the increase of television availability and pharmacies, or just uh, pharmaceuticals becoming commonalities, and at the time novel innovations that uh, had garnered people's attention in all kinds of ways. Nevertheless, you know, sex magic. So a lot of it was behind the scenes was being began and started by Hollywood itself. Most of the people who have entered into Hollywood at its beginning and its rise were very much um, indoctrinated into sex magic one way or another, which part of the reason why Hollywood is well known for its casting couch, um, well, uh, abuse or abuse of auditioners, trying to get them while they're young, pretty much, essentially. I'm not, yeah. So, um, practice that began to proliferate to larger degrees during the beginning of the 20th century has its rooting in sacred prostitution of pagan temple worship, such as of Baal, but not before the next 5 years possibly being a time of political, sociological, military, and pharmacological coercion, unless people make their repentance known by their lives, known and know the ways of God, not attempting to be God, but under the light of virtues that are effectual to truth, significance, live to give honor to God. Becoming a heresy and blasphemy, as reverence of the holy or divine has been attributed to self-reference or paganism. As most polytheistic religions established embodying God, God in their beliefs, the mark of the beast. Berean Standard Bible. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, only the Father. Matthew 24:36. Reason being, I will say, free will. The second beast was permitted to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship it to be killed. And the second beast required all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. Revelation 13, verse 15 through 16. Berean Standard Bible. Because you have kept my command to persevere, I will also keep you from the hour of testing that is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. Revelation 3:10. Schismatic character development in anime. The character is usually established with a dysfunctional cognitive association between two extremities of temperament, much in a bipolar circular feedback loop that is predominantly schismatic, chaotic, malicious, neurotic, narcissistic, which usually appears as the latent and usually noted to be the true identity that can range from seething aggression, catalyzing a melodrama, romanticism to sheer melancholy, much disseminated moderately by the media producers' application of these and other cathartic themes of ecstatic emotion, providing only just enough substance to enamor the viewer, which is usually and mostly held back, making it a craft and not an art. Even providing full capacity of art at the juncture of sociological civil collapse, concerted induced change of values is still a craft, as it is made for distraction for political reasons, being that art is turned into a sociological strategy, promotion of ignorance by distraction during a critical time of greater importance, relevance, or upheaval. Enchantment of wonder to, to enchantment of wonder to misdirection, of societal focus towards false hope, promises of an innovation, technology, in schools of thought that are not orchestrated to work cohesively by spontaneous development, engaged and brought in to alter societal attitudes towards utilitarian applications of agendas of political, ideological, spiritual, medical, and paradigmatic scales that reach even geological modification of the earth itself and its function. Whether a protagonist or not, the theme of having an alter or depersonalized personality of fragmentation or rather compartmentalization, as for Springmeier, a psychologist, early whistleblower of occultic ritual abuse, and recovering the mental health to people who had been, state so, as well many others sources claiming the same about modes models in the fashion model industry and has been emphatically expressed in several music videos of pop stars. An altar is usually found to be the consistent theme. An altar is usually found to be the consistent theme. An altar is usually found to be the consistent theme of the character of most anime shows, and consistent in shows of every genre. Even the most well-known character Goku had a dual nature motif, supposedly it being claimed or exclaimed that the reasoning for the character's good intended nature was due to him having had a head injury as a child, and so stating that well-intended nature is secondary to first and heterodox to orthodox conception of original predominant nature or original state. Most of the shows have more extreme forms of character personalization, usually in the form of an altar. The altar can be described as the implicit location of demonic occupancy, or the case of abiding individuals who will or desire possession, communion with the daemon rather than communion with God, thus why it's called an altar. Common words, witches, spirit animals, spirit guides, animal spirits, muses, jinn, devil, demon. The theme of stark twinning and depersonalized schizophrenia like format is what will usually be apparent in most anime franchises, in the last 25 to 30 years specifically. Of course, it would require a sincere dispute of debate, which is a rare commodity in a social sphere that has no inclination to honor. Where can a debate be found as mostly what we have been exposed to is performances of mock debate? Where can a debate be found as mostly what we have been exposed to is performances of mock debate by sophistry and where the only intended purpose is to gauge the public's awareness and disseminate or delineate only as much as is necessary to keep the audience or public complacent with political inclination and not essential or vital truth. Usually, in an ongoing discourse of perturbing, of over-analysis, usually in an ongoing discourse of perturbing, of over-analysis, disputes that have already been settled to their final conclusions, including trajectory of proper criteria, categorization, and subject. If it wasn't for career move charlatanism, professional narcissism, and malicious sociopathic intellectual sophistry, assaults on academics, then we would have a true knowledge base of knowledge rather than schools of thoughts that have redundantly held in contempt any inclination towards providing people a pure authenticity of art form or science. Woe to you teachers of the law, for you have taken away the key to knowledge. Luke 11:52. New American Standard Bible. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel around on sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much of a son of hell as yourselves. Matthew 23:15, New American Standard Bible. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. Matthew 23:25, 25. Societal catharsis, English Standard Version. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of the servants of the Lord. 2 Kings, verse 9, or 2 Kings 9. Uh, New American Standard Bible. For when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by fifties in a cave, and provided them with bread and water. 1 Kings 18:4. In the Book of Kings, in the Book of Kings, when Ahab and Jezebel had their zealots kill off all the authentic and replaced with their veiled false prophets, who worshipped by destruction, defilement, prostitution, and self-mutilation, how does one make an annunciation to God when we find self-righteousness and delusion in the squandered squalor of a devil's rebellion, having already riddled the landscape of a bias that man is not noble, naive, and to be kind is to be stupid, and and do good is to be of a false notion of nature that that and that guns are better than words, and that compassion is a vestige of a failed ideology that has no rooting in wisdom because the dignity of man is merely an illusion of false hope to be taken advantage of in mockery, since man's greatest quality was in clarity of good will, but predatorial inclination of dominant, redefined uh, illusion of inclination to dominate, redefine, and disgrace, as this is clearly the beginning of every person's walk back to God. One witnesses the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then either presumes to continue to, or walks back to the tree of life, having known what death is, more so knowing that what life is, as treasures of heaven, or a name more precious than jewels, or anything that one might desire, presumably not requiring the entire opening of revelation to gain the senses of come back to life. In the Book of Kings, when Ahab and Jezebel had their zealots kill off all the authentic and replaced with their Baal false prophets who worshipped by destruction and defilement, prostitution, self-mutilation, how does one make an annunciation to God when we find self-righteousness and delusion in the squander and squalor of a devil's rebellion, having already riddled the landscape of bias that man is not noble but naive, and to be kind is to be stupid, and do good is to be of a false notion of nature, and that guns are better than words, and that compassion is a vestige of a failed ideology that has no rooting in wisdom because the dignity of man is merely an illusion, false hope to be taken advantage of in mockery, since man's greatest quality was in clarity of goodwill, but predatorial inclination to dominate, redefine, disgrace, as this is clearly the beginning of every person's walk back to God. One witnesses the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then either presumes to continue or walks back to the tree of life, having known what death is, more so knowing what life is, as treasures of heaven, or a name more precious than jewels, or anything that one might desire, presumably not requiring the entire opening of revelation to gain their senses to come back to life. Webster's Bible translation. But he said to them, I have food to eat that ye know not of. John 4:32. New King James Version. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. Proverbs 22, verse 1. As assimilating yourself in the culture of the world, as as assimilating yourself in the culture of the world as it is, or just follow your agnostic sense where it may, is a decision to live one's life in the devil's rebellion, as what is good for one is good for all, and there is no such thing as a zero-sum game, not even in the machinations of scheming and trappings for the exploitation to make slaves to meager desires, crumbs in sight of the glory of the truth. English Standard Version. Indeed, I count everything as lost because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ. Philippians 3, verse 8. King James Bible. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. James 4, verse 3. Christ is life. Christ is very much equivalent to life. Jesus said unto him, King James Bible, Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. John 14, verse 6. Yet what standing does this have with just proliferating and echoing the same shame into infinite retrograde? Yet what standing does this have with just proliferating and echoing the same shame into infinite retrograde, where every man is self-deluded in a primordial sense of momentary self-justification, of maintaining their fragile sense of validation that is easily tested to be false, when all they claim to be for and protect and stand with or agree are the same. They defect over vanity of the stupidest arbitrary differences, and what they claim to defend with honor ends in slapstick-like idiocy of why human poverty is propagated by mockery to be the identity of humanity itself, when it is continuously emphasized by the certain people who are not simply upper class that propagate and profiteer by provocation of contentions, but present no viable catharsis of a non-rhetorized good. An answer non-solicited, an answer non-solicited, an, an non-solicited answer, a non-politicized, non-zero-sum game dialogue that seemingly would require a discourse in a disenfranchised manner of bringing the ancestral evangelization of harmony back into progression. As music is considered the celebration of life, yet it is not the foundational cornerstones unless we ourselves are actuating the expression of the art form, not the craft. The highest aspiration of self-actualization, the highest aspiration of self-actualizing desire of man to see evidence of significance. In order for art to have proper meaning, language must have proper meaning, and for language to have proper meaning, then respect must have a proper place of ordinance. Respect being a smile-smirking redundancy backlog of reprimanding ad hominem, rhetoricism, and sophistry to form mental gymnastics over a grand scale of intellectuality to obscure its place of existence in the hopes that it will be lost in its reasoning. But the fact of the matter is that respect is the defining key to knowledge which is spoken about in the Holy Bible, as love will falter, and has been held in esteem for its emotional predisposition for exploitation in the warfare of proportions. Once again, if any man wants to stand in front of the altruistic light of moment of truth and glory that is flaunted and depicted, that if it could be done, would be thrown into the stubble of depiction of a righteousness that has been portrayed in an effort to mute the unmutable. What good is any progeny of any if all any will do is proliferate and echo the shame of one's present generation, even more so, one's pride, one's arrogance. Given that we are at continuous threshold for the truth, as much as those who hold the truth in unrighteousness are at a threshold for its legalism. Given that we are at continuous threshold for the truth as much as those who hold the truth in unrighteousness are at a threshold for its legalism. As the question is how do we keep the answer from becoming the problem? How do we keep the recurrence of the original priest order from being overthrown or killed as corruption keeps replacing those of stature towards integrity, honesty, righteousness in God rather than placeholders of mercy? As more and more people have made it clear their association in their output social influence that it is what they openly claim and state to represent, and yet our psychology institutions redact the relevance of most forms of what does not fit their criteria, standards that don't recognize anything that is inherently evil, is the non-analytical thematic sense of partialness, so sterilized that there is no academia in practice besides reduction of causal effect, being something that even atheistic philosophy admits to. Recognition of evil being a real thing, although is not given much broadness beyond humanistic adaptation, of there not being a broader scope of reality of greater expressions of sentience that might be part of a multilateral view of nature, the animal kingdom, microbial and biological life, non-biological, non-material life form, or dimensionally transparent, intelligent intelligence. Although we do keep inclinating towards philosophies that explore machinations, devices of modified biological and material composites as being designated towards ideologies of being somehow living, conscious, and assimilating a theological evolution, that these things are natural progression of life's consequential trajectories, questioning the non-perturbed notion of other forms of intelligence that are panoramically congruent to being not dualistic, but part of expression within within their context are not opposing but incompatible, that are harmonious in the chaotic, the altruistic in the parasitical, creative in the deterring, the authentic in the counterfeit, the truth in the craft, holy in the profane, the honest in the manipulative. As more and more people make it clear, as more and more people make it clear their association and their output social influence that it is what they openly claim and state to represent, and yet our psychology institutions redact the irrelevance of most forms of what does not fit their criteria of standards that don't recognize anything that is inherently evil, is the non-analytical thematic sense of partialness, so sterilized that there is no academia in practice besides reduction of causal effect, being something that even atheistic philosophy admits to, not given much broadness beyond humanistic adaptation, broader scope of reality of greater expressions of sentience, kingdom, biological life, non-material life forms, transparent intelligence, towards philosophies that explore imaginations and devices of modified biological or greater sentience or beings that may not be in agreement. Whether you want to, call it Godzilla and King Kong or whatever else, there's going to be a time where it comes to that man realizes that we're not the greatest or the biggest or the most intelligent thing in the universe. And this doesn't have anything to do with AI because people always want to inclinate towards that one notion that it's like, oh, well, I will not accept theology, but I will accept, physical materialistic notions of like, well, you must be talking about technology. And it's like, both could exist. It's like, no, actually no. And it's like, no, we are, yeah, exactly. I mean, if no, we're not the biggest, greatest, most intelligent thing. And it's like the only thing that they have to go ahead and compare this to is a creation of our own instead of the acknowledgement that, well, in the super view of history and human experience, not everything could be confined to modern academically accepted psychology or modern academic psychology because it in itself has not went ahead in itself went ahead and turned and went towards a when it went and adhered went and went towards the politics of psychology rather than actually having any admittance to reality and that, well, besides pathos and possible clinical instabilities of some sort, there could be some strange things happening in the world, and you can't just go ahead and immediately, how do you call it, count someone off from having a proper dialogue because they think that there might be something strange in the world. That is not that is not a criteria to go ahead and start, evaluating someone as to whether or not they have a a right to self-witness or if they are, if they are a unreliable witness to themselves. I mean, so there's that. Um, I think regardless of how a person goes ahead and tries to do things, present themselves, actually be honest, give their inner thoughts, their outer thoughts, actually uh, change, you know, give any kind of sense of defense, right? Psychologist is going to go ahead and diagnose you as something or another. I mean, I would be astounded to go ahead and find that a psychologist will actually be, you know, very frank, in a courteous way, actually, being civil, and tell a person, look, I mean, there isn't anything wrong with you. Yeah, the world is very strange. We've got. I mean, what have I said? I've seen a UFO, and it's like, well, I mean, whether it's the History Channel or if I, say something else, it's like, I mean, none of these things are being taken into consideration. The only thing that's being taken into consideration is just having this, um, observation, not so much in one's benefit. That it's like, if I can prove myself to be sane, then you should go ahead and abide instead of, well, you actually have some other, diagnoses. And it's like, first of all, I mean, exactly. But let me get back to what I was saying. Academically speaking, the most reject. So, um, current worldview of modernism and postmodernism, that is a deconstructive intellectually anarchist partiality to undermine reality to any interpretation, knowing there is an existent thing as, God and the devil, good and evil. Objectively, these things being existent and expressions of sentience that is a little bit, you know, above our capacities. And the thing is that you're not able to actually go ahead and have a cohesive conversation with a psychologist about these things, and them being like, I mean, it doesn't have to be in the doctor's office. It can be just in a normal, um, you know, normal, um, living situation where you're able to actually have a dialogue about this, and it's not this immediate reprimanding kind of sensibility that it's like, all right, you just went and hit the mark on being not a reliable witness, because what you're saying is is not insane, but it's not commonly accepted. Because certainly, if we had enough people actually admitting to any of these things that are very strange that, most of us have experienced, and the thing is, I keep on running into people that have, if I ask them honestly, they'll tell me it's like, I've I've had some strange experiences, and certainly that there have been some strange experiences with my family and elsewhere. Um, but the thing is that you can't say this to a psychologist. You can't say this to anyone in the psychology department, because immediately you lose all notion of, of them actually perceiving you as, look, like, you want to go ahead and give me the actual reputability to speak on my own behalf, instead of just like, well, depending on that one notion of just what you just said, everything you said doesn't have any consistency of actually you having proven your point. Um, the only, I mean, yeah, you do seem to be somewhat, um, emphatically saying, but because of this one thing you just said about something being strange in reality, out of place, phen- um, paranormal, what happens? You lose all, you lose all credibility, and immediately you are reprimanded to on the behalf that you're not allowed to go ahead and be accredited as having a valid, speaking properly, speaking in a way that is, excuse me, sir, instead of being so sterilistic, right, about reality completely to the point that you want to go ahead and just dose me on something, you just leave it at that. Um, there are possibilities. So you need to at least, give me that much uh, right, because I had that right regardless. All right. So as they and throughout history have been traversing the historical and intellectual landscape to meet their superior's agenda. The academically speaking, academically speaking, the most rejected subject matter is the existence of God, as it is not an open forum of education and learning, but a cabal of intellectual data and knowledge gatekeepers that, when explored, is found riddled with fraternal secret society associations that have overt thematic inclinations towards deities in the favor to honor exaltation of these intimately known polytheistic entities. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many so-called gods and lords, note that King James and other versions, right, of Bible does state that Paul does actually claim and say, while for even though there are uh many lords, he says that for himself. Yes, there are many lords. For us, there is only one Lord, because we're not going to go ahead and traverse the entire scale of the cultural phenomena. So many different, fallen angels and gods and spirits, roaming the lands of the earth, here and about, and trying to go ahead and establish, well, all of this is good, because you will find that, well, no, no, actually, there seems to be, you know, one, at least one, that is good. And it seems to be that just like you have any household, you have a bunch of, rebellious and spoiled and well, I guess the word would be wicked children, which the father pretty much, eventually needs to go ahead and put all of them in their place. Um, Essentially, this works in other ways. I mean, we're talking about partialness, right? Well, then, partiality towards something, well, you're already stating that it isn't whole, it isn't one. There seems to be a a dispute between what is supposed to be an agreed and properly aligned conception of a person. And I'm not talking about a human. I'm talking about, a being, an intelligent being, whether it be a god or what have you. I'm here saying that there's not a partiality to good, which is the reason why it's so well known that the truth is usually a good thing and the truth will set you free. Because, first of all, there would have to be the acknowledgement that there is a truth, that the truth is more than just, um, you know, subjective minutia to go ahead and um, not actually apply any thematic existence of reality itself. That's like, I mean, you want to keep on, you know, causally reducing the causality of things so that way they always appear to be partial, just to go ahead and keep this this facade going that, well, yes, you know, there are the good, that there must be one who is good. Uh, Certainly, if we were all just, taken completely wayside towards, corruption, deterioration, degeneration of um, highest facets, then none of us here would still be alive to go ahead and carry this conversation. The rule, I mean, there would have never, civilization would have never taken off because supposedly Um, it's just about survival. And the thing is that, well, I mean, if civilization went ahead and took off, it goes to show that the sentience of the earth actually has a communal sense of actually being civil and actually inclinating towards uh, good, which has a grandeur to it, which people don't want to accept. That's like, good leads to more good. And so it's like, well, there must be a peak in the top to this thing. You can't possibly tell me that there's actually anything better than, let's say, someone will give their example, right? The most primitive one will be, you can't possibly tell me there's something, better than a woman. It's like, um, first of all, a woman is not a reward, and the person will disagree with you there. It's like, actually, a woman is a reward. It's like, nah, no. No, no, it's a relationship. There is a mutuality to each other's proper, place in relation to each other. Um, and then you find out the person doesn't really care about all these, intrinsic levels of what it actually consists of. They're just pretty much, look, I mean, I go by not smarts or thoughts. I just go by inclinations uh, inclinations of what be, what aren't even survivalistic are procreative, and the person is just there, um, venting or overbearing their sense of, of dominance. That's like, well, I'm right either because I'm right or because I can prove it by physical force. It's like, sir, there's more to this than uh, like competition. And then what happens with the other individual is that, well, they thrive on competition. And the thing is that they don't thrive on competition. They simply get a huge dopamine rush out of competition. So it's like that is my mainstay. That is my view because it makes me feel good. But the thing is that, do you not see that there's something not good about this? And it's like, I don't care about that. I just care if it makes me feel good. And it's like, all right, well, if it makes you feel good, is it, let me ask you this. Uh, what about the rest? I mean, if it's actually good, And they'll tell you, like, I don't care about the rest. I just care about if it's good or for me. The thing is that that brings back the entire table. What's good for one is what's good for all. Just as a man sharpens just as iron sharpens iron, a man sharpens another one. So, but then that's going into certain places where academics immediately just laugh you off and write you off like, oh, you went ahead and triggered the one thing you're not allowed to go ahead and say, something about the actual, you know, um, value of nobility or attempting to be so or trying to actually facilitate an act of goodwill. I mean, and it not being, you know, put through this filterization of analysis just to go ahead and state that it's menial. It doesn't really mean anything. And then the following discourse or the final statement to their argument, is that, well, it's menial because you and everyone else, and they will emphatically lie about their own behalf, that it's like, you know, well, we're all menial because none of us actually have any meaning in our existence, because it's like, you're denying the most profound aspect of the person, that they're not just a body. They're alive, and they have a sentience at the same level that you do. And the thing is that, we're finding out more and more and more and more that there's much more than just the physical reality. Anyways, um, as they and throughout history have been traversing in the historical and intellectual landscape to meet their superiors' agenda. In academically speaking, the most rejected subject matter is the existence of God, as it is not an open forum of education and learning, but a cabal of intellectual data and knowledge gatekeepers that, when explored, is found riddled with fraternal secret society associations that have overt thematic inclinations towards deities in the favor to honor exaltation of these intimately known polytheistic entities. They'll go ahead and express that, right, in a very subjective manner of stating, well, this is just an idea that we cling on to as part of tradition of this particular fraternity or this school, going so far back. Yet, and they go ahead and give it this sort of, Hellenistic, actually more of the Enlightenment era, humanism of being, there isn't anything strange or spiritual going on here. It's actually artistic and more of a statement about the the art of brotherhood. And the thing is that it turns out that all of this is sophistry, because these people are well informed and well acknowledging and knowing of these polytheistic entities. They have intimate knowledge of them. So their fraternities are lies, stating that it's just an artistic temperament to go ahead and honor the a certain kind of a message from the fraternity. That's not what's going on. They are putting up all these different kinds of things to go ahead and honor and the exaltation of these intimately known polytheistic entities, right? Exactly. Or even if there are so-called gods, whether I mean, I use the Berean Bible, but yes, I mean, the other ones do say, although there are many gods, for us there's only one, because we're trying to go ahead and strive for the good one, which does not have any, you know, kind of you know, juxtaposition in, in a paradox. A person will go ahead and approach this thing and be, well, I look at it from one side, I look at it from the other. I try to go ahead, if I could, give a 180 degree, angle look at it. But the only thing that I'm going to find is that it's good. Never mind me trying to, getting emotional about it, but the fact of the matter is that it's good. And you know, people immediately go ahead and play the atheist card, sterilize immediately the entire, discussion, and being, what do you mean by good? And the thing is that they speak with such, sense of wisdom of serpents, but they're not willing to go ahead and be innocent about anything. Like, what do you mean by good? And they're just prying at the notion that you went ahead and mentioned something to actually be existed in reality, to be in definition, right? Definitively good because it is alive. It brings forth life from life that has intelligence and sentience that seems to transcend beyond the physical plane, because science itself states these things, that there seems to be frequential phenomenons of paradigmic levels of reality where things are not physical, yet we are so adamant on trying to control the narrative of what does this consist of, as far as sentience, as anything that is alive but is not part of the natural world. Starts to become, as some people say, preternatural. I just use the word supernatural, paranormal. Um, and so stating that, well, yeah, there are other living things out here that are not exactly physical. They are living in the sense that they do have the capacity to interact. They do have a sentience. They seem to have a will and are going and doing certain things. And well, the problem here is that they don't have a physical body. So now what? Are we going to stop considering them to be alive? It's like, well, no, no, that's not it. So, I mean, I'll go ahead and bring up Xenobots for a second. I mean, if I go ahead and look up Xenobots on the internet, on Google, it states right there that scientists are not able to figure out whether these things are living, are artificial, are synthetic, are are or they state if they are something else completely different, or something else different completely. And the thing is that that's completely false, because these things came from frogs, frog tissue. So it's a genetically modified, um, it's a genetically modified, um, application. It's a synthesized robot, yes, from living tissue, exactly. After it having been genetically modified. So, anyways, um, for even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many so-called gods and lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for for whom we exist. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we exist. Instead of going ahead and try to go ahead and speak theology here, I'll go ahead and just state it. It's like, I mean, how can you deny it? It's like there's the externalization of having a view of some sort of anything comes down to one. You don't have a multitude of varying sources to go ahead and actually come down to the origination of one original source. Dichotomy does not exist before you go ahead and reach a pre-existent axiom that is the origin of something. Otherwise, we're talking about a dichotomy where the centralization of it all meeting is what finally makes supposedly the numeration of there being an existent one. But that's the thing is that we can't even go ahead and agree on numbers. So we can't even agree on numbers. We can't go ahead and agree on what is alive and what isn't. We can't agree on our science that it's like, well, possibilities certainly go ahead and direct everything towards there being other aspects of what could be considered to be living, um, insofar that these things are pre-existent throughout history. Um, we can't seem to agree on whether the Earth is a living thing or not, even though everything on the planet goes ahead and tells us that this thing is not dead. We can't go ahead and agree that that there are things that are good and there are things that it, are not bad but are evil. And it doesn't require too much more than your God-given pragmatism or in your sensibilities to know one from the other. Because otherwise civilization would not have made it this far to actually be able to go and reach these kinds of gainings, of earnings, of progression. None of this would be able to make any sense unless there was actually a pre-existent, not theory, but a unified, how do you call it? A unified, uh, pre-existent, not a unified theory, but a unified intelligent design, or a pre-existent, not unified theory, but a pre-existent unified design, which is intelligent. So there you go. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Isaiah 14:12. Son of the morning is a reference to son of the beginning, which a lot of people, you really do have to go ahead and make strides and ebbs and flows to go ahead and finally get to this understanding that when it's saying, "Oh, son of the morning," it's like, what, what are we talking about here? Because I mean, if we're talking about just the morning, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, son of the morning, son of the beginning. Uh, the greater hidden hand of occultism is found in Freemasonic literature that openly state their theological view of Lucifer being a real person or individual, in terms for a god such as the great architect of the universe. And the openly overt and covert landscape, congregating pagans worshipping in the same rite as what is historically documented anthropologically to Baal, Isis, Moloch, which simply the video of the notorious Bohemian Grove, which former President Bill Clinton had been asked about in a Q&A or question and answer forum, and gave at least one statement about their practices. Answer given: are they those rich Republicans who stand against redwoods trees naked, right? It was a druidic and pagan practice to knock on wood, from which we get the luck charm and superstition of knocking on wood. Beliefs that spirits inhabited trees and that knocking on wood keeps them from getting in the way of one's path. Other sources state that you would knock on wood to somehow address them, similar to someone coming to your home to knock on your door. Standing against a tree, specifically a redwood, that have centuries long growth and size, might be a form of symbolically embodying a spirit when done in a ritual manner naked. The true juxtaposition being that people openly state what they do and what they are a part of, including statements like being of or selling their souls to the devil, and wearing the open claims aesthetically to promoting it. The second being the Psychology Institute's promotion of cognitive dissonance by denying the relevance of any of these things and their atheistic interpretation of spirituality, God, truth, good, error, and placing morality of being something of lesser significance than it actually is. Atheistic interpretation of spirituality, God, truth, good, ever, and placing morality of being something of lesser significance than it actually is. Morality and integrity are not concepts of intellect nor social constructs, but actual defining matters of themes and substance to which the world adheres to, and are vital, if not inseparable, to the quality of the world's condition and existence itself. The key to this was to make for an atheistic world view where no life is real besides this one, and there is no God besides one that is to be challenged, as the character of God is continuously put into a trial of obscuration with a zeal for defiance, rather than having a non-biased position which would be actual sciencing. Without a view of God, as everything that has occurred tells us that we are in fact part of a purview of a greater being of intelligence, with so much contention and contempt towards this possible appropriation coming from man's political sophistry, towards others who would like to know and proclaim the reality of a magnanimous, preeminent intelligence, and an authority that is outside political control or jurisdiction, so much so that we can't even establish a simple notion that the earth is a living thing. But the absolute being that factually or facetly is continuously making himself apparent, regardless of the contrived dispensation of scientific journalism's effort to maintain a monopoly on intellectuality itself and awareness. There is a broader level of intellect that is to, in comparison, us like ants or small cellular organisms trying to understand a greater being journeying upon its bark like of a tree set on a mountain that has only scratched the surface of the grand scale of the magnanimity of God's emanation. Grandiose would be a simple turn of presupposition that would leave this generation in its mass cognitive dissonance. By over-analytical politicism, indoctrination, or debate becomes only a means to transfer ideologies that have no partnering with ideals, truths, or virtues, since the Hegelian dialectic has and always been to keep people in a state of nihilism. An art form is no longer a valid point of statement, as there is no formality of respect in the ideation of mere prospect. An art form is no longer a valid point of statement. The art form is no longer a valid point of statement, as there is no formality of respect in the ideation of mere prospect, and nothing else in what has been made in these crafts. In this case, many a time forcefully posing these things on the viewer and society. As many a time we hear about some craft of entertainment that is causing major amounts of toxicity that is promoted or tabloided to be celebrated. I had used the example of a bowling ball being rolled towards unsuspecting pins, oblivious of its coming. Seemingly, the awareness of stepping out of the way is all that is needed, in this case the answer being respect, which acclimates the covenant between man and God. Freedom has been simulated, not properly established and emphasized truthfully, as these are societal assaults of sociological warfare to maintain controlled chaos, the requirements being the ignorance of people. An example of this being true is how we're forced to listen to music with commercial lyrical content even when we sit down to eat. The restaurant makes money and royalties are paid to the musician and its company that we don't have a choice as to whether we listen to, or have a say if we want the sentiments to engage. This is actually done in an effort to have the patron come in and out of the restaurant as quickly as possible in order to gain more clientele. And two, it is presumably played at a volume and tempo that makes for a social time that can't be quiet, engaging, intimate. Given that this is only for those who cannot afford a higher gauge priced restaurant, doesn't make an effort to even provide non-GMO food or organic, originally known as all natural food. This has been done so that customers eat more quickly and associate eating a delicious meal with the music, creating a subconscious desire to eat quickly and take on the social sensibility that is completely false, as the advertisement of it being a wholesome, endearing place of fun or enjoyment is not the attitude of the restaurant's company's business. We're assaulted by many forms of media that continuously try to make one feel and think one way or another. This is intellectual and psychological coercion that essentially becomes mental captivity over time due to the themes of divisive sensual ambitions and attitudes placed with commercial, esoteric, and occultic messages in design when many a time the musician who is performing the song doesn't even have a pre-forwarded written lyric arrangement, but is given the attributive conception of Greek acting that classically was attributed to daemon or demonic inspiration, and has a rather important spiritual aspect that is not being emphasized, but efforted to be obscured from people's awareness that maybe the things we want are not really desires we desire, but have been socially concerted to be swayed into the allure of vanity into a state of ignorance and controlled chaos. Again, the same dialectic can be applied across the board in all social media and supposed contemporary art forms that have been designated as entertainment and art, not only manipulations of the simple sleight of hand of distracting someone with an aesthetic and scheming of covetousness for their authentic substance. Usually truth is the main center vantage point of all this is uh, uh, usually truth is the main center vantage point of all this in an ongoing political sociological warfare axis that is rendered towards giving people a false value, when in fact they displace the meaning of value altogether. The person or individual may not know the value of themselves, or what is truth their place in life, as this shouldn't aspire towards grandeuristic sky's the limit ambition, but a healthy state of mind and an attitude of acceptance that inspires others to be congruent towards maturity at any stage of life. Seemingly, we are imperfect animals God did not make us to be. Otherwise, we would be a well enunciation of He who we all have our mixed feelings about, but would like to know in truth's fullness. As Paul said it, I have not yet obtained it, and be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. New King James Version. Now that I have already, not that I have already attained or am already perfected, but I press on, that I may lay hold of that for which Christ Jesus has, has also laid hold of me. Philippians 3:12. Seemingly we are as fearful of righteousness as much as we are of getting up in the morning to go to school, to learn earnestly, or to work to make an honest living. New King James Version. Therefore you shall be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5, verse 48. Never has these words been so accessible and understood in a profound multilateral sense that rings clearly through knowledge and of science than today, where wonder of possibility doesn't require much faith, and yet our accessibility has now become an impediment to faith. Faith being a real thing, which can be tested by simply blessing or hating someone from your vehicle or on a sidewalk and seeing their reaction and response. If someone told you that you, depending on whether you believe in something that is not evidentially physically materialistic, affects its power to benefit you. Faith is a real thing, like love, non-romantic, essentially all forms. Romance itself is not love, but a sensual desire for fulfillment that once obtained quickly delineates towards either interest and pursuit of love or disinterest. Example of a fallacy, love is fleeting, or to have and in our possession. Then why do we not treat it like so? Love is fleeting because it is one of the delineations of a grand scale Hegelian dialectic as one of the queens of the chessboard in a strategic full spectrum dominance incursion crusade, while Lao Tzu's Art of War was considered a controversial book decades past, because it stated that one must not attack their opponent unless fully verifiable that they would not lose. Fighting is sure to result in victory, and you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight even at the ruler's bidding. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hold out baits to entice the enemy. Bait of the 20th century has been the same bait to catalyze mankind in the wrong direction since that of the beginning. Other than pharmakia or drugs, which the original tree of knowledge of good and evil was probably a precursor to, but more so now for recreational purposes, which factually there is no such thing as a recreational drug, that if I have enough time to write up under the chapter, it might be about that specifically. Since entertainment and pharmakia have been merging together for some time, since its cultural collateral onslaught of CIA operatives conducting a first of world-wide doping to bring about a hedonistic reform of unreality to once again catalyze the progression of man into a trajectory of missing the mark altogether, reacclimating people to polytheistic taboo sensibilities that are now forming a new turn of catalysis of the planet in, in form of technocracy, genetic and pharmacological alteration that has never ended since its inception in the 1960s, which I will discuss if I have time in another chapter. I guess truth is king, since it is always placed with only one turn of position, which in a strategic sense of the chessboard motif, as well as political persuasion to falsity, is continuously shifting the goalpost. For although they knew God, They neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and darkened in their foolish hearts. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Romans 1, uh, verse 21 through verse 22. Conclusion by comparison. The factuality of righteousness and telling the truth usually tending to cause persecution and possible assassination is a direct comparison to Jesus Christ being martyred for the same. Making an attempt to help and birth righteousness, life, good, opposite of death, by benevolent action tends to show the true paradigm and panorama of reality as these themes are equated in both nonfiction and fiction. Oddly enough, Protestant churches only acknowledge reading the Holy Bible in self-referential form with historical Hebrewic delineation, while Catholics have a length of wisdom and testimonies that is not particularly known by Protestants. One specific, the seven deadly sins, and their seven redeeming virtues by the Desert Fathers near Cairo, Egypt, or at least one figure of philosophy and wisdom like Thomas Aquinas. His extensive quote from something I was able to find on a summary of him. His extensive writings explored the relationship between the mind of man and the mind of God, and his synthesis of knowledge relating to this joining of intellect and religious belief, titled the Summa Theologica, earned him a lasting reputation among scholars and religious alike. Um, Seemingly, witches are not appreciative of the state of grace because it has no bearing with judgment. An eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth does not work, and so works of criminality are stifled. As transgressions are at a standstill, there is no catalyzing fire to mayhem for a temporal sense of glory. There is no grandeur for their gain. As some would say, the magic is gone. Good and evil being two final destinations of two realities have been intrinsically intermixed since close to the beginning of this world. Seeing the progression and effects of entropy on just about everything and anything, good is usually the original state of most things. Because people are adamant on misconstruing whatever they can, with a sheer depraved sense of glee and rebelliousness coalescing, I'll actually state a few truths that cannot be denied about the nature of righteousness, how that differs from the deterioration of this world. The one-to-one ratio of male and female reproductive relationships as majority intrinsically found throughout nature in animals. The subjective application of examples that are incomparable to human life is a fallacy of supposed empirical evidence. While I have nothing to say about gay or lesbian sexual preference, or even transgender, as one does not know what is the story of people's reality, one thing can be certain. There is no such thing as bisexuality. The evidence would be how this is a claim and presupposition for justification of multiple partners, or a claim that relationships are temporal and not to be successive, and in and presupposition for justification of multiple partners, or a claim that relationships are temporal and not to be successive in an actual life-affirming bond, per appropriation. This is also condoning and lenient towards sexually transmitted disease, as well as allowing for sociological schism and deterioration of civilization altogether through increasing defilement, disordering of population sexual integrity, and turn to falsehood of disingenuous personal history. The sexual societal schism that has made more and more rare the natural acclamation of life that a relationship and family should come about, and how you get men who have family family, and women whose progeny are mostly half siblings. Polyamory, multiple partners, being the most damaging possibility to a civilization that will be civil and not easily swayed of its life-affirming inheritance. While the science community is building up the data and evidence for the many facets of reality, the actuality of meaning to the words we use that are not concepts of intellect but are actual aspects of the natural world, numbers and science are still far from finding the many of the unknowns. Public dissemination usually being of some bias, public dissemination usually being of some bias or partialness that is usually placed as a benefactor for its politicism agenda. While prayer is still being held as a fictitious while prayer is still being held as a fictitious superstition of a falsehood called faith, since the global zeitgeist continues to deny its reality even though it's as old a facet of mankind as its origins, but is held in full regard regardless of awareness for why the Holy Bible is written in such questionable format, to hold the factuality of redeeming truth to be something of no bearing of vainglory, which why it is used to this day as both a guiding light for life and strategy handbook in deception warfare, because there are those who are seeking one or the other, and for the wicked, their only prospect to life is the sifting and murder of another, and it seemingly is nothing more than the continuum of transgression that is part of the expression of the serpent's tail of all following after. Nevertheless, the progeny of all who claim to have loved theirs, being nothing more than the echoing of their shame, including hindering those who would have came to the light of the day, ever increasing towards the perfect day. The New King James Version. The path of the just is like the shining sun, that shines ever brighter unto the perfect day. Proverbs 4:18. The elect immediately discerns those who will take the matter seriously towards its proper trajectory, and those who choose vanity as respect. Charity is a commodity. Vanity as respect is a commodity, and not command of virtue that implicates and facilitates all other functions of truth. Yes, the elect immediately discerns those who will take a matter seriously towards its proper trajectory, and those who choose vanity as respect. Is a by respect being charity ultimately is a commodity and not command of virtue that implicates and facilitates other functions of truth. Controversy not being the reporting of it in fact, forensically, intuitively, or any way communicable, but the covering of. Those not wanting to discuss anything of importance, if not an armchair interest of intrigue and musings. New King James Version. Do not become idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 7. Yeah, I mean, controversy not being the reporting of it in fact, forensically, intuitively, or any other way communicable, but the covering of. Um, Animals have very resilient and unpredictable behavior and make choices that show some evidence of a greater nature than just part of the animal kingdom. Animals have and do save and help other animals, including rivaling species. And in some rare cases, which if it could be verified, predatory animals on occasion save or help prey animals. Do prey animals on occasion help or a predatory species? Animals that are predatory can develop companionship and bonding relationships with animals of a species prey. Although interesting, the point being whether considered predator or prey, animals save each other, and animals save humans. Humans save animals, which give the word salvation quite a bit of actual meaning to the word in the abiogenetic sense. So intrinsically, there must be greater expressions of the same benevolence from higher statures of estates here or elsewhere, fundamentally found if the supernatural and all its themes is discovered or finally disseminated to be true. Is there the possibility that there is greater expressions of salvation? This is an axiom, but because I will not be proving that God exists, since I've already made an attempt to speak with the wicked, magic practitioners, or wicked, I'm not going to go ahead and say who or what, but yeah, and found them in places I did expect, and found them in places I didn't expect. Family friends that I had known since childhood, uncles, high school friends I tried to contact, even cousins younger than me, asking me unsure if they would or unsure about anything really, would sell their soul, they asked me. I pulled my phone out and said no, but let's see what we find on Google. The video of a rapper saying how to sell your soul is what showed up. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, which has a dispensational. So yeah, um, I pulled my phone out and said no, but let's see what we find on Google. A video of a rapper saying how to sell your soul. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, which has a dispensational connection to Jesus' birthday since it fits the timeline of 33 and a half years, as well as a less relational consideration of October being given the Gregorian calendar zodiac symbolism scales, um, which in slight can be comparable to the righteous judge. Really, autumn is the season of harvest and peace, and if it is factually the time of Jesus' birthday, it would make sense that the prime of the season is around the 31st of October. All Saints' Day would be inverted to obscure and hasten the entire natural unfolding of the season into one act of expediency when it is all a time of for inheritance and adherence take natural act towards gaining a conscience for clarity. The ridiculousness, the ridiculous amount of multicolored candy and children dressing up in a manner of covering their faces at night becomes something else, to pretend to become to something else, or to identify with something else, like a werewolf or some anti-hero or superhero, but be the personality of the ambience and atmosphere of the contrived effort at adornment that hangs over every outlet of market, stating it clear as early as mid-September that besides death being venerated as exciting, horror films being the theme of the entire month. To us as adults take it as triviality, and to the social skeptic, deep-seated superstition, but to any child, this is grooming for partying, drug consumption, getting lost when a bit older adolescence, and gaining a palate for eventual witchcraft indoctrination, as the colleges are now full of it. Even so much as the local community college mascot wears a large dark brimmed hat illustrated near the front office. While death is a natural aspect of life, and I myself feel the effects of morbid suffering. There is no salvation in evil, as integrity is to God and not the devil. But such words are a laughingstock in such a day and age where death isn't venerated. Murder. In the store Target, I remember shirts such as "Which way to the wine?" And yet the catalyzing expediency doesn't end with Saturnalia. Regardless of the fires around them, are still hurrying to plan their New Year's partying celebration. Although life, as I remember, I couldn't keep up with my supposed friends in my early 20s, going to the bar 5 nights a week. Wanderlust that, as I remember, wanderlust that even the local guitar center attendant agrees. Yeah, there's hidden closed-eye capabilities that people use to project their photography after through practices that have occult use as life becomes in a use of affirming night as day and day as night. Endless rhetoric of evil and chaos being the natural formation, endless rhetoric of evil and chaos being the natural formation of and the necessities for creation to come about, the edifice of a reality that has its findings in what estate is of the physical plane existence, which because regardless of fiction or non-fiction, nothing that can persuade a person of good as being forced to witness it would cause them to hate and rebel against the very thing that gives their life and vanity any luster. Even the brooding of a wick of a candle lantern unseen, which is the most essential part of occultism, and why the allure is such. Once again, even the rooting of a wick of a candle lantern unseen, which is the most essential part of occultism, and why the allure is such. Same, because it's supposed to be a secret. But the thing is that in truth, in honesty, in what is noble, and what is actually of a proper uh, congruency of something actually being understood, right? Panoramically, actually fits into ordinance as it, as one would say should, right? It's not supposed to be a secret. But the thing is that there you go. Secrets usually are amongst people who have a lack of honor. When it's not a matter of actual, some kind of a persecution of some sort. But yeah, this whole sort of, how do you call it, um, delinquent fraternal sensibilities of just, um, I nod you with my elbow and wink at you, and supposedly, well, no one knows about our advantage. Yeah, that's not noble. That isn't credible. That isn't good. That is that is essentially, well, it's not even elitism because in order for it to be elitism, then the very best must be honored and must be actually acclimated to be in proper concordance and ordinance with what would be. They just have to, so the same stories their parents told them in certainty that they would have a life worth living in popularity and worldly success. Had to have kept their fingers crossed when the time comes to trip someone else and hiddenly be taught the ways of growing up to be like a wolf howling at the moon, in the splendor of vigor, filling up their glasses with the wine of their proprietary means of instating an enterprising promiscuity, gossip, violence, and acclimating a spiritual dissension of being who everyone else wants to be, also known as idolatry. All they have to do is embody the shadow of a murder and propagate a fool's paradise, even if it is at the cost of the entire world's welfare and what it knows and believes. Whether Frank Sinatra or George Carlin, there's a world that the common man only sought to know, thank God we're not invited. Christian Bale played the role of an American psycho, a world where everyone lied to each other to keep the party going, the depths of lunacy of the wealthy and their illusions of drunken fame flowing into every home. And if something wrong happens, they're also there to say it's the average or common person's fault. I met one young man when he wasn't even 24 yet. He's a Freemason lodge member on Facebook with pictures of cloak and ritual mask, flaunting every occult thing he can find. I know the world from the view of somewhat persecuted. Witches are not appreciative of the state of grace because it has no bearing of judgment. Tooth for tooth, an eye for an eye doesn't work, and some criminality comes to a standstill, stifled as there is no transgression to catalyze. Tables of cards are folded up, the seats are empty as it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and they can tell that if they don't do something soon, no one will be having a bad day, and if no one is having a bad day, then no one might come to gamble. Even so, they'll pour you a drink as though just because you know it's somehow a death wish to be near them. But it's not my choice, it's theirs if they do harm. It's not my choice, it's theirs if they do me harm. Always looking to transgress, even if it means telling people they have to fight when there never was a reason to, in an effort to have someone else pay the price. Because one thing is made aware to us all as a starting ground for our sentience in these mortal bodies, which their proper use and function was for learning, not catalyzing the planet into a transmutational experiment, apotheosis by false affirmation of fallen angel, which by the way, the theme is practically inescapable since everything is named after them. And yet they do not represent most of the actual matters of the themes that embody existence towards life, but is in continuous counterposition of good. Good being something that, if good for one, is good for all in the true sense, and not the hostage held false academic discourse that falls into zero-sum theory that good is severed from its meaning. People may not know it, and in doing so, abundance may never be shared to those who are unaware of such a thing as having a harvest. As having a harvest. The redeeming key to knowledge is respect, which the warfare of this world has vehemently made every effort to demean or exhaust the definition of a law that when held will only be fighting the law that hold existence of oneself intact. Respect being something that has been quite proclivity of the irreverent and slanderous. Why slander is attempted to deface everything has a prestigious sense of dignity emanating from an attempt to self-actualize dignity by naively making an attempt to be noble. Yeah, to be noble is usually to attempt to be noble because, we all know very well that we're all run through the system where people go ahead and do not actually provide us with the acclamation to garner our integrity from adolescence, more lose it and find ourselves only holding the remnants of of our wherewithal in our 30s or possibly later. That yes, I had integrity. Yes, integrity is real. Yes, there is such a thing as nobility, to be noble. And to attempt to be noble is not a naive thing. Why slander is attempted to deface everything that has a prestigious sense of dignity emanating from an attempt to self-actualize dignity by naively making an attempt to be noble. Because certainly if you're innocent and unaware, then you are naive. But you're not naive. You just don't you haven't been informed yet. That's all. You cannot go ahead and state that someone due to their age or when they were born or under what conditions are naive. Which if someone was naive, then that would be actually a reason to actually provide them with some accommodating mercy or actually bringing them out of whatever spell of that word is to be naive. We live in a world of cherry hounds that have defiled the cream of the crop for sport in the wine of their violence, make mockery of the emasculinated brethren that they have betrayed in full by formalizing a generation that has no affinity to marriage and therefore true love. It's capitalized on everything from promotion of sex dating, friends with benefits, and pushing the agenda that if you are not sexually active, something is wrong with you, and selling the body parts and stem cells of aborted fetuses. All the while, people continue the rhetoric of villainizing anything and anyone as part of the true warfare paradigm that the war isn't won with swords, with words. The symbiotic relationship and appearances of both rivaling and prey and predatory species commingling together in a snapshot of what appears to be an acclamation of nature beyond the primal instincts of the animal kingdom states something about some of unstated or underemphasized aspects of even visceral standards of natural order and law. King James Version, where you shall go out with joy and be let out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Isaiah 55, verse 12. Is the universe intelligent? Are humans just animals or something more? How can hell not exist if Hollywood forces it on the population year after year by themes of destruction, death, violence, damage, criminal insanity, and supernatural evil? Wouldn't the continuous agreement of these projections of what is thought to be of non-effect at levels that because a substantial amount of the Earth's bias governing a sentience is continuously intellectually and emotionally agreeing, communing towards might cause these things to manifest into physical reality? Physical reality? Temptation is dumbing down the population common sense and whimsy of commercialism while being made cohesively part of the culture of the devil's harvest. Yet Hollywood is an aspect of the leadership of the world and its institutes based on knowledge and education. Knowledge based on knowledge and education. Um, New American Standard Bible. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth." Genesis 1, verse 26. New King James Version. "For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor." New American Standard Bible. "Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." English Standard Version. "Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." Matthew 24:28. The answer is that panoramically the truth is that yes, these things exist in a descendancy of justification, full-scale ordinance, and have their designations to harmony or to chaos, which I suppose there is greater levels in heaven, the kingdom of grace, and the abyss, the current state of hell's dominion, and a kingdom of judgment. New King James Version. "But as it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear has heard, nor have entered into the heart of man things which God has prepared for those who love him." 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9. "From ancient times no one has heard, nor ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for him." Isaiah 64, verse 4. Monday. Sí, está bien. For ancient, for behold, I will create new heavens. For ancient times no one has heard, nor ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for him. Isaiah 65, verse 17. Behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. Former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. James 1, verse 12. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life God has promised to those who love him. If factually we are indisposable and cannot simply walk out of existence altogether, then there must be a place or ordinance and proper dwelling, as the motions of God and nature tells us that regardless of fluctuating, everything is always going to its proper location and trajectory. New Living Translation. "From eternity to eternity I am God. No one can snatch anyone out of my hand. No one can undo what I have done." Isaiah 43, verse 13. "Even from eternity I am He, and none can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it?" Isaiah 45, verse 9. Woe to him who quarrels with his maker, one clay pot among many. Does the clay ask the potter, "What are you making?" Does your work say, "He has no hands"? Isaiah 45, verse 9. Yeah. Good and evil is the basis of wisdom or lack of thereof in the use of knowledge, for one end or another. The evidence of this would be how evil never returns to its intent towards the good of wisdom, only attempts to use it in presuppositional or intermediate manner, and are not labels but realities about the nature of our universe as it stands today. I personally have a dichotomy of order that I subscribe to by logic, and yes, I believe in morality, God, creation, and Jesus. The order being of what was placed here good, bad, mistake, and error, corruption to the point where mistakes and accumulation of error begins to change the nature of the original state of a being or thing or a subject or idea, whether concrete or ideal, before it can be proven to be truth. And finally, the final state of corruption being evil, the dichotomy being good, bad, corruption, and evil. New King James Version. I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. John 14, verse 30. King James Bible. Where they do these things in the green tree, what shall be done in the dry? Luke 23, verse 31. New American Standard Bible. The world is passing away and also its lusts, or its desires, but the one who does the will of God continues to live forever. 1 John 2, verse 17. English Standard Version. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. John 8:44. Jesus speaking to the politicians and rulers of his day. The cherub that covereth Lucifer was originally the cherub that covers the throne of God. He was able to hide the presence of God, but is not allowed to take it away. Reason why he is referred to as the Lord of Illusions, also known as the Father of Lies, which all his followers have the same characteristic of using illusory, false wonders of manipulation. New American Standard Bible. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Ezekiel 28, verse 14.